We are going to talk about leading with accountability when the ground is shifting. And this is the outline of what we're going to do today. So we're going to go through, we're going to do a check-in in the chat, or you can come off mute if you want and share. And that part I won't put that in the YouTube recording. So that part will be cut out. And then I'll introduce myself, and we can introduce kind of who we are and what brings us here today. And then today we're going to talk about uncertainty and workplace stress and the solutions and tools that we offer at that you could start putting into practice immediately, actually. So my name is Allison Sabula, and I founded 10 Collective along with 3 others. We're pictured here. So Marianne, Danielle, and Bree. And Marianne and Danielle and I worked at Paces Connection together, and Bree and I worked at the University of Massachusetts together. And we realized that people who worked in child serving organizations, which is who we were serving at these organizations, were being asked to care a lot about the people they served, but were not always being shown that same care at work. So we founded 10 Collective 2 years ago to help bring the trauma-informed care and psychological safety principles into the workplace, the same ones that you all offer in your roles. So that was the inspiration. So I have a master's in public health from Boston University. I have a career in nonprofit management, education, the environment, and human rights. And maybe some of you may have attended my events at Paces Connection in the past. So then I worked as the associate director of curriculum at the Center for Child Wellbeing and Trauma at UMass Medical School. And you can learn more about us and our team if you go to our website and click on team. So the types of services that we offer at 10 Collective is that we help with low morale. We can help you integrate psychological safety. Welcome to the new folks. We can implement structure, norms, and agreements. We can train managers on people skills, and we can teach team self-regulation skills. We can build custom programs, and we offer one-on-one coaching, training, assessments, educational content, and more. And so you can reach out to me if you want help with that. And so I just want to go back to this slide and our check-in question. And so go ahead and find the chat. If it's missing now that we've entered full screen, go ahead and take a moment to pull up the chat and type one thing from the world or from work that feels uncertain and stressful right now. The cost of living for you and for clients, Medicaid and SNAP loss. Yeah, absolutely. Holding space for that, Sarah. More difficult population and regulations. Yeah, there's been a lot of maybe policy changes, different programs, different funding changes. All of that is feeling very uncertain right now, and that's affecting the people that we serve in our roles. The lack of productive communication. Yeah, absolutely. Holding space for all of those. There's a lot for sure. And certainly at 10 Collective, we have experience serving clients who lost funding or weren't sure how they needed to switch their funding strategy. So that has happened in the public health space right now for sure. Okay, feeling like, yeah, people are not listening. And that can be such a result of having a really uncertain outside environment and inside the workplace environment too, because as we talked about last week, and we'll go over again today, when the brain is in fight or flight mode, we have trouble collaborating with other people. We have trouble listening. That's a direct result of high stress and a high stress environment. So thanks for bringing that one up, Heather. So now go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. So I'm so glad that you all found your way here, because this is exactly the types of folks that all of us had been working with in our careers when we realized that all of us, that work environments were often just not as supportive as they could be. So thank you all for the amazing human services work you're doing. And it's not easy to help populations in need every day, and then especially if you're not feeling supported at work. So let's get into it. So as we touched on a little bit last week, there's, this term, the polycrisis era, is starting to catch on, where we're just feeling, it's very intense, like all the various things that are happening. And so I won't go over this one again, but we did talk about it a little bit last week. And so I'll send out the slides for everyone and you can read this article. But basically, just saying that people are feeling very overwhelmed and overstimulated right now and bombarded with bad news every day. We get like the bad news right here, where it's like constantly in our hand and we're constantly seeing it. And that can be really overwhelming. And this is the first time in history where we have such immediate access to every piece of bad news anytime it happens. So, yeah, there's global and economic political instability, as someone mentioned in the chat. There's the rising cost of living, which someone mentioned, job insecurity, right? There's the climate crisis, and so these things can be feeling really overwhelming, and there's a lot of uncertainty right now. And also, I want to acknowledge, because this is so hyper prevalent right now in the news cycle, that AI is causing a lot of uncertainty. It's sort of like, wow, am I going to have to integrate that into my job? Am I going to have to know what all these tools are? And is this going to change life as we know it, like really quickly? And it kind of already feels like it is changing our life really quickly. Like, I would say I started using ChatGPT about a year and a half ago. And now I'm using AI chat, I'm using Claude. I use it like every day. And that's a really fast uptake on something new. And I'm curious to hear in the chat, maybe you guys want to share if you also are using AI and in what capacity. But, you know, things are accelerating really quickly. And I just want to acknowledge and hold space for the way that that feels really unsettling. So, from this article, and the link is here, it said that it took ChatGPT 5 days after launch for the chatbot to hit 1 million users, whereas it had taken Facebook 10 months and it took Twitter 2 years. So that's a really swift change. And here is a really interesting chart visual of technology over time. And this is something you could probably spend a lot of time looking at, but I found it, and it's just kind of like when you really grasp how much change we're experiencing right now compared to other moments in humanity's history, it's really a lot. It's a lot of change very quickly. And I want to hold space for how unsettling that can feel, that uncertainty of where this is going and what we might have to adapt to next when it already feels like we've adapted to so much. And so I'm curious if you want to share in the chat what in your life is feeling hard to adapt to right now, and what has changed dramatically since you were a child or a teen or a younger adult. And so I was born in the 80s. And for me, having a phone always in my hand and always scrolling, it does feel really weird. And sometimes it almost feels like life isn't real. If I'm on my phone or I'm looking at screens too much compared to my childhood in the 90s where there weren't so many screens. So I would be curious to hear from you in the chat. What in your life is feeling hard to adapt to, and what has changed dramatically in your lifetime, if you want to share? Okay, the unpredictability that Trump causes on the daily. And every day a new crisis feels unmanageable. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's feeling like very chaotic and unpredictable compared to other leaders that we've had. Getting your students to stop recording TikToks. That is such an interesting challenge, Heather. Thank you for sharing that one. Lack of morals, okay, and everyone entitled, yeah. But that's possibly something that lots of generations have struggled with, but it may be feeling more acute now for certain reasons, like it does seem like society goes through cyclical patterns of forgetting that psychopaths and sociopaths exist, and then we just let them have power and we let everything get very corrupt and unequal, and then that always crashes, and then we kind of have to start over again. So yeah, we're kind of in a weird time period where we have let the people who want the most power take over, and then that kind of influences our whole society. Um, and Erica, I would say that's one of the ones that's hitting me the hardest as well. It's sad to see people not engaging with one another and always on a device. Yeah. And I think that we're all really experiencing the downstream negative effects of that, where people seem really lonely and detached. And then in the public health realm, we're seeing that is leading to deaths of despair at a really high level. So, as well as, loneliness being kind of the precursor for other regular health events that you wouldn't think of, like heart disease. So that's such a big one. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. So we looked at this slide last week, and I wanted to include it because it's always a touchstone in my teachings, that the research literature has identified 3 factors that universally lead to stress: uncertainty, the lack of information, and the loss of control. And so uncertainty being number 1. And so I really want to hold space for everyone right now that we've just named all of these different things that are uncertain in the world, things that are uncertain at work, for our own households, for the people we serve, and politically. So there's just a lot. And this is something that is going to universally lead to stress. Okay. And you may not be holding really kind, nurturing space for yourself lately. Like, you may forget, oh, it might be really hard to feel regulated and safe and clear while this is all happening. So I just want to acknowledge that. So uncertainty is not knowing what is coming next. And it causes the nervous system to remain in a state of high alert. Okay. And when it's combined with a lack of information or really mixed information, that's going to increase stress. And then feeling like we don't have any ability to control or influence the outcomes is going to add. And I can think of a lot of situations where we're feeling like that. So let's get into workplace uncertainty factors. So we're going to kind of move from the world at large down into the workplace. And so workplace uncertainty may look like we don't even know what our mission is. It's unclear what the scope of work is, or what we're doing with this program or project. Or it's unclear what tasks and decisions certain employees are responsible for. Or we don't know what results are we aiming for, and how is that going to be measured. And so if you think of something else, feel free to drop that in the chat. These are some of the factors that I think lead to high stress when you have high uncertainty at work. And this is after consulting for many, many years and working with many different nonprofit groups, and also working in leadership roles at nonprofits, government agencies, is that you kind of think everyone has a lot of these things put together, but a lot of them don't. So some folks don't have a clear mission statement. And it should be written down, and it should be accessible to everyone, and it should be touched upon regularly. This is why we exist. This is the work that we're doing. And even just having that amount of certainty is really comforting to employees. Okay. Oh, I know what our mission is. I know why we're here. I know what we're doing. A lot of organizations lack a strategic action plan that relates directly to the organization's mission. And I see this a lot actually in my consulting work. It's absolutely something that 10 Collective can help folks create. But you want to have, this is the actual plan, this is our mission, and this is the actual plan of how we are going to achieve that mission. And it's really important that these documents be in writing, and that they be really clear, and that they're available to all the employees. And of course, it's going to look a little different if you're a teacher at a school. But essentially, these things, people need to feel that the work they're doing is matching the mission of the organization or the agency. So, lack of structure as to which tasks employees do that are part of that plan. So, if I am an employee somewhere and I sit down and I have 3 tasks that I'm responsible for, it's really important for me to be able to understand how what I'm doing every day relates to the plan and our shared goals and how we're going to measure those goals and account for those and how we're going to celebrate them when we complete them and how that relates to the mission as a whole. Inconsistent or unpredictable leadership behavior. I talked about that a little bit last time, how I was in a situation with a toxic leadership, a toxic boss who seemed possibly to be a dark tetrad type personality where they were really hungry for power and affirmation all the time. And this person was extremely unpredictable and it was very stressful. We were not able to have strategic plans and tasks as it related to the mission. It was really stressful. You can share in the chat if you've ever had a work experience like that. And if you don't want to share, please know that I'm also holding space for how stressful that must have been. Poor or withheld communication, unclear decision-making rights, like who has the authority to make what decision. A lot of meetings, which, people pretty much universally find meetings stressful, but a lot of meetings can be avoided if more people were clear on which decisions they had the authority to make and were actually empowered to make those decisions. So a lot of meetings run around in circles because no one knows who is supposed to make the decision. But if that was clear to begin with, there actually might not be a need for a meeting. And then constant change without context and without communication. There are structural factors that I've kind of already touched on. Sometimes you may feel like you don't have the time to create workflows, structures, and standard processes. I hear that sometimes. Well, it often becomes our last priority to create that process document or or to create that workflow. There can be external things that I want to name, like unclear goals from funders and partners, and there could be a lot of uncertainty built into the work itself. You may not know if the populations that you serve are going to get all of the resources that they need or whether a program is going to be shut down on any given day. So there's some things that you can work to add structure in, and we'll talk about how to do that. But some of these things will just always be somewhat unpredictable. And sometimes that's very enjoyable, right? Sometimes people feel very bored by too much routine in the work. And we move towards certain vocations and careers because we know, like if you're a case manager, you know that your cases are always going to have different stories and different challenges. And that can be very stimulating and energizing to you to tackle, different issues every. Uncertainty and a lack of structure at work can create a chaotic and stressful work environment. It can create incivility between employees because of that unclear authority and decision making on tasks and projects. You could have higher turnover. It could be unclear when a project has been completed because you're not sure, like, why are we doing this? Where are we going? Unclear what the goals are. And so all of these things can be outcomes. And again, that not knowing if this work is making a difference can really lead to pretty low employee morale. And if you've ever experienced any of these, go ahead and share in the chat. So let's talk about the brain science of uncertainty. There's overlap with what we talked about last week with urgency and urgency in the workplace. So the brain is designed to seek certainty. And when it cannot predict outcomes, it often will enter, especially if it's chronically uncertain, with combined with maybe a sense of urgency, then it could enter a high alert and stress state. And so, obviously when people are chronically in a stressed state, our ability to think well starts to deteriorate, as well as our physical health. So constantly being in a state of stress is going to also create more sick days and worse health, in addition to mental fatigue, difficulty concentrating, reduced decision-making ability, memory issues, and worst case scenario thinking. And last week we talked also about the hand model of the brain. This is something from Dan Siegel. And so that's where the hand is the brain. Welcome new folks joining. And the outside is the cortex. And so the prefrontal cortex is often where we're talking about as the decision-making center or the rational center. And then on the inside is the amygdala, which puts us in fight or flight, which when it does that, it's actually trying to keep us safe. So when we perceive that something is uncertain, the amygdala may come on board and go, oh, I just want to make sure that we're safe. But then we get thrown into this state where we don't have access to our rational decision making anymore. And so Dan Siegel calls that flipping the lid when that happens, where we've lost our cortex and we're just now trying to stay alive. Now we've sensed a real stressful event. So what we kind of want to think of is when we have uncertain stress state at work and it becomes chronic, we may end up in fight or flight quite regularly, which means we're not using the best, most rational part of our brain to make decisions. And it makes it so that we're often unable to collaborate with others. And we're not able to look at the challenges in front of us and think about how to solve them in the very best way possible. Here is a journal article, some research from 2017, Uncertainty and Stress, Why It Causes Diseases and How It is Mastered by the Brain. And so when this is from the article, we feel uncertain when we anticipate that outcomes will turn out to be something other than expected and that we are unable to avoid surprise. And reducing uncertainty requires cerebral energy. So basically in this article, they're talking about how anytime that we have too much uncertainty in our environment, it is going to take a lot of our mental energy to try and resolve that. You know how oftentimes we'll ruminate, and we keep thinking about the same thing and turning it over and over and over, and we're trying to figure out the resolution. That is going to take a lot of energy, and we're not going to have much energy left to do great work. So it's something to think about. So there's something called allostatic load, which is basically the amount of stress that we're able to take before our systems kind of start to shut down. So, and it contributes to systemic and brain malfunction. So just like I mentioned, like impaired memory and as well as physical ailments. Some of the effects of chronic uncertainty and stress over time: weakened immune function, increased inflammation, higher risk of chronic illness, depression, burnout, decreased focus, cognitive decline, weakened prefrontal cortex, decreased memory and learning, being more reactive and less connective and collaborative, disconnection from meaning, and losing touch with what matters. And then, of course, many of you know that chronic or complex stress from childhood compounds work-related stress. So if we're bringing in adverse childhood experiences, these are the 10 ACEs, then we're going to have an even harder time putting that lid back on and getting back to a regulated space once our lid has been flipped and we're in fight or flight. So when we have clarity and structure at work, we can have increased productivity and efficiency, reduce stress and improve mental health, stronger accountability and ownership, and enhanced teamwork and collaboration and communication, faster decision-making, and higher employee engagement and retention. So let's talk about the solutions, and leading with accountability for increased employee and company wellness. So I started to notice in my consulting work, I started to notice that sometimes in chaotic environments, accountability was the first thing to go. So we don't have structure, we don't know what we're doing, we're not going somewhere where people don't know what they're in charge of. And so it's really impossible to say, hey, did you get that thing done? If it's very convoluted to understand what we're each accountable for. So let's talk about that. Practice number one, which a lot of people said was really helpful from the part one we did a couple weeks ago, was just naming and framing and just noting that, yeah, you know what? There is a lot of uncertainty out there right now. The news is overwhelming. We are experiencing high turnover. We are feeling uncertain about the future of our funding. Like helping to name the things that are uncertain so that people feel more psychologically safe at work. We don't know which political policies will happen from day to day. We don't know who's going to be impacted. We don't know what kind of future AI is creating for us. We don't know what kind of climate events they're going to be, and we're worried about the future. So just naming the uncertainty can do a lot and starting there. So practice two is brave leadership. As a manager, if any of you are managers or looking to become managers, or even just working as a colleague to other coworkers, being able to say the hard thing, but especially if you are a leader, being able to say to someone, hey, I'm noticing that you're having trouble focusing. How can I be supportive to you? What's going on? Is it a work factor or is it something outside of work? These are often really brave conversations, especially if we're new to management and supervision and we're new in these roles. And these aren't always the easiest things to do and say just intuitively. Oftentimes we have to practice and we have to learn. So that is something that we offer at 10 Collective. We do manager coaching and training. So increasing those skills. But essentially, I do highly recommend reading Dare to Lead. And she's kind of talking about being brave at work and saying the hard thing. And go ahead in the chat to write down how comfortable do you feel as a manager or supervisor on a scale from 1 to 10. So 10 being very comfortable, 1 not comfortable to say the hard thing to those you manage. Okay, so 7, mostly because I'm very new to management and I'm reading that book right now. Awesome. That's amazing. Yeah, it's a great book. Highly recommend it because we do have to be brave at work. And so these are some of Brené Brown's principles here. Rumbling, which just means having the tough conversation with vulnerability, living into your values. And so at work, what that looks like is like, hey, this is our mission and our value at work. And I noticed that it's not happening. And I want to make sure and check in with you about that. And these other ones are covered in the book. Anyone else want to drop in how comfortable they feel on a scale from 1 to 10 having a hard conversation at work? Maybe if you're not a manager, you could just like in regards to having a conversation with a colleague, go ahead and drop that in. 5 depends on the person and the topic. Yeah. Yeah, it can definitely be situational for sure. So tool number 3 is is to understand uncertainty and stress in the brain. So this is something that we offer. We do trainings on the brain science of stress. We offer resilience and regulation tools, communication and conflict resolution trainings, and de-escalation. Okay, 8.5. Awesome. That's great. Thanks everyone for sharing. 6, I'm a student leadership role on a few boards. Okay, cool. So, there's no one has said like a 1 or a 2, so that's nice. Everyone's feeling a little bit of comfort to have a hard conversation, so that's great. And then with practice, it will just get better over time. So number 4, we touched on earlier, which is having very clear processes, procedures, and roles. So the must-haves, you must have a mission statement. You must have a strategic action plan that matches the mission. You must have work plans and workflows for each employee that match that plan. You must have very specific, clear, and up-to-date job and role descriptions for every employee. And so if you hired someone to do something and that's changed, you need to update their job description. And it does have to happen pretty frequently if the job changes, because what someone agrees to come and do for your company, if that starts creeping and that scope creep of their role, pretty soon they may have something that they didn't agree to, and that doesn't feel good to people, right? We want to make sure that we have really strong consensual agreements and that it doesn't feel like people are being coerced to do things they didn't sign up to do. And clarity on who is the authority for which decisions. How much, on a scale from 1 to 10, how much clarity do do you think that you have or your team has? And so if a couple of you are students, I think, how, or maybe you have an internship, how much clarity do you have in your internship on a scale from 1 to 10, where 10 is very clear, 1 is not clear? Okay, an 8. Wonderful. Okay, lots of 8s. That's wonderful. That's great. Okay, so practice number 5. Um, okay, and then I'm seeing 7 again. We have a couple of communication issues, but mostly good. Yeah, of course, organizations always have a couple of things. Yeah, wonderful. So this is a framework that we teach at Tend Collective, and it's called Awareness, Attunement, Acknowledgement. And today I'm not going to go into the whole framework, but I'll outline it. Awareness is our ability to know how we're feeling at any given moment and to offer regulation to ourselves and get regulated. And then if we're in leadership, then we can attune to the people that we manage. So first we have to know how we're doing and feeling, and then we can notice better how other people are doing and feeling. And then acknowledgement is, in this situation, a synonym for wisdom. Being able, and judgment, being able to know and acknowledge what the situation may need in any given moment. And that is something that we develop over time with a lot of practice, and including sometimes we make the wrong acknowledgement, the wrong decision for what the situation may need. So it's this idea of being aware of how we're feeling, tuning into how others are feeling and caring about how they're feeling, and then being able to say, I wonder what this moment really needs, what this challenge really needs, and being able to acknowledge that and being able to take action on that. So that's something that we train on. So I want to focus on acknowledgement, okay? And so this is where leading with accountability is really huge when we think about, as a leader, it's my job to acknowledge what this moment needs. And so, and then seeing, was that the correct thing that this moment needs? So does the person I'm supervising need me to hold space for their emotions? And so that might be something like, hey, I noticed that you're feeling overwhelmed. Could you want to talk about it? Okay. Coaching and encouragement. Do you need some strategies on what to do when you feel overwhelmed? Or, oh, I know you've made it through some tough spots before, and I'm sure you could do it again. An assessment on whether the tasks they're responsible for match their level of skill and experience, or whether it's too easy or too difficult. So morale can decrease when something feels too easy, in addition to feeling too difficult. And it could be that you need to assess, is this person in the right role for their skills? Does the moment need strategy, direction, structure, and accountability? All the stuff we've been talking about today. And if so, what does it need? Does this person need more resources? Do they need to learn something new? Do they need a bigger budget? Do they need another person working on the task with them? What resources might they need? They may need permission to make a decision and the safety to fail. Like, hey, I know this is a tough call and you may not do it correctly, but it's okay to fail. Do they need that? Do they need permission from you? Do they need you to step in as the supervisor and model something for them? Here, let me show you how to do it. So what are some other things that supervisees may need? These are all things that we can think about when we're managing others, that we may want to run down the list and say, gosh, what does this challenge, in a one-on-one supervisee meeting, what do I need to acknowledge here, and what is going to be the best, most wise decision moving forward? Confidentiality. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good one. Really good. If you have any other ones, feel free to put them in. Okay, so we do have time to listen to a little audio clip. So let me see if I can do that. We are going to listen to a short audio clip, and then I have one more practice, and then we will conclude. And so this is an audio clip called Expectation versus Agreement, and it helps clarify what is the difference between an expectation and an agreement at work. So I'm going to share this. And I think it's about 4 or 5 minutes.
This is Steve Chandler,
We
and I
can hear
wanted
it.
to talk to you today
Thumbs up.
about expectation, and expectation contrasted with agreement. Really, we have two choices in life when we relate to other human beings. One is to have expectations, and the other is to create agreements. Expectations are toxic, and they ruin people's chances at a good relationship. Let me give you an example of that. I went to work with a company recently, and they had all kinds of performance breakdowns and productivity breakdowns, and I was asked to go train them in the owner-victim choice so that perhaps morale could be lifted a little bit among the people on the line who were creating the products. Well, the real problem was in the leadership. The leaders had expectations of their people. So they would walk around expecting certain things. They would expect certain levels of job performance. They would expect quotas to be met. They would expect certain quality standards to be hit. And they had all these expectations. And then there were the people themselves who were trying to live up to the expectations of the leaders and really resenting the leaders because they said most of the expectations were unreasonable. They didn't really realize how understaffed they were and stressed they were. So the whole place was in a morale crisis, I would say, a total morale crisis. And as I moved among the leaders and talked to them and tried to figure out how can we fix this, they would tell me about a certain employee who wasn't living up to expectations. And I would say, well, okay, so what's the expectation? And they would say, well, we expect him to get this job done by Friday so the customer can have it. The customer expects it. We promised the customer the job on Monday, so we want it finished at the plant by Friday. And I said, okay, great. So what happened? Well, it wasn't done. And it wasn't done until next Thursday. So the customer was very upset. Pretty soon, we lost our preferred status with the customer, and everything went downhill. Well, I said very quietly, who was in charge of that product being done? And he said, well, the supervisor in the plant. I asked him a question that startled him, or at least quietly left him speechless. I said, what was your agreement with him? And he looked at me as if I had asked him, have you taken a ballet lesson lately? Or some very strange question. And he didn't answer. And then he said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, on the matter of getting this done by Friday, what was your agreement? And he said, well, you mean I have to have an agreement with everybody? I got to go around and get an agreement? He knew I expected it by Friday. He got my email. He knew the customer was expecting it by Monday. I don't want to have to go hold his hand. He's a professional. I'm a professional. And I said, well, look, here's what doesn't work in the workplace. Expectations. People do not look forward to living up to expectations. In fact, people rebel against expectations. They don't like it that you expect things of them. They would rather you agree with them about something. And so we worked together. I brought the foreman in. We sat down. He said, do you agree to have the next job ready by Friday? And the foreman said, well, I would like to, but I'm a little understaffed, so I can't promise it for sure. And the leader looked a little startled and said, well, what can you promise for sure? If you gave me one extra person to work on it, I could promise it Friday for sure. If I don't have an extra person, I can promise it next Tuesday for sure. The leader thought for a while, and he said, I'll give you an extra person. Now, with an extra person, what can I count on? Well, you can count on Friday. Thank you. They shook hands. Now, that's an agreement.
So that is a much longer uh, audio lecture, but that was just a small piece of it. If anyone wants to share in the chat, or actually you could even, if you wanted to come off mute, you could share your reaction to that clip and the difference between expectation and agreement. I first heard that clip while you're sharing in the chat, or again, if you want to raise your hand, please feel free. Um, I think about 12 years ago. And it really changed a lot for me because I realized how often our expectations go unsaid and how we're not asking the person to make a consensual agreement with us. And a lot of workplaces are coercion based. We have a recording of a lecture I gave on our YouTube channel on the difference between a coercion based and a consent based workplace. And a consent based workplace is what he's talking about in his example, where you meet with your colleague or someone that you manage and you say, hey, I really need this done by Friday. How can we work together to get it done? I'm sure we're both here to get work done, but how can we come to an agreement together? And that feels a lot better than you have to do it because I said so. So when people are working together, it feels better. Yeah, go ahead, Heather.
Oh my God, I actually get to talk on here. I've typed so much. I remember when I first started at the school where I am about a decade ago.
Mhm.
I had a principal who got mad at me and said, I don't understand why you keep saying you don't know how to do this, that you didn't know that you had to do this. That's always your excuse. And I just
Mhm.
would say, that's not an excuse, it's an explanation. If
Yeah.
have not been trained, how am I supposed to know what the heck I'm doing?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great example. That's pretty much right in line. How would I did anyone ask if I had the knowledge and the training to be able to do these tasks? And it should feel collaborative and it should feel like I put this at the bottom. It should feel like they care about you. And that's one of the things that we are very passionate about at 10 Collective, that we want to create work environments where people care about each other. Hey, like what do you need? Oh, okay. Seems like you probably need some training. So really holding space for that, Heather. This is the last slide. Um, Really firm accountability, okay? And I know that some organizations struggle with this. And so when issues arise, you always, when it comes to the workplace, you always want to start with the work. Is the work getting, because we're all here under the agreement that I'm going to do some work for you and you're going to put money in my bank account every month. And so when you're leading and managing and supervising others and a challenge comes up, and they always do come up, you want to start with the work. Is work getting done? Is it the work we agreed to? Is the work high enough quality for what we need? Does it support our organization? And does it move us forward? And we talked about all the different pieces and challenges that could make it so that the work is not getting done or it's not the right work. And so some of that's going to be on you as the leader or on the organization to clarify, but some of that's going to be on the person. And there do tend to be issues that arise where the work is not getting done and the organization has provided all of the needed things, the clarity, and it's still not getting done. And so as a leader, you may need to have some tough acknowledgments. And so what we recommend at Tend is kind of a rule of three. So the acknowledgments may be like, as Heather just said, maybe someone needs proper training. Okay, so you're going to offer it. Maybe they need more resources. They need to understand more about what the challenge is so they can make great critical decisions. Maybe they need more time, more flexibility, more support. Right? So if three acknowledgments are made and have been offered, and the person has been supported and coached, and there's still no change, then it's time to reconsider and to think about whether this employee in this particular role is a good fit or not. And so we do talk to folks who are saying, wow, like we're just, we're just not getting any work done anymore, or this certain department is really not meeting their goals. And so as long as those goals and the outcomes are really clear and the tasks are clear and their job description is clear and you've gone through the acknowledgments and you've been offering them, then it is time to start thinking about, okay, maybe this is not working out. We've tried 3 of these. And so sometimes this can be a problem where at an agency or a nonprofit, there is no one holding anyone accountable. And so it should be this balancing act of the leader and the organization offering really good clarity and structure and trying to figure out, are we being clear enough? Are we offering good enough structure? And then once those are all addressed, okay, now we really need to hold our team accountable to move this work forward. And if that's not happening, then we probably need to reconsider. So that's all the slides today. So I am going to go ahead and stop the recording.